My name is Nora Bennett. I was 32 years old when my mother stood in my late husband's living room, placed a realtor's sign against his fireplace, and told my 7-year-old son that the house his father built was going to his uncle. When I asked her why, she looked at me in front of my whole family and said, "Widows don't own legacies, Nora. They survive on what real families allow them to keep." I held my son's hand, and I said nothing. Because 3 days later, he would find the key my husband left behind. And my mother would learn that grief has a paper trail too. Let me take you back to that afternoon. Because I remember every inch of it. I had just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital. My hair smelled like antiseptic. My shoes hurt. My scrubs had a coffee stain near the pocket. And I had spent the last hour of my drive home trying not to fall apart at red lights. Daniel had been gone for 22 days. 22 days is not long enough to learn how to breathe beside an empty chair. It is not long enough to stop reaching for a phone that will never ring with his name again. It is not long enough for a 7-year-old boy to stop asking if heaven has garages. But apparently, it was long enough for my family to start measuring the walls. When I pulled into the driveway, there were 4 cars parked outside my house. My mother's black sedan, my brother Grant's silver SUV, my sister-in-law Elise's white car, and a vehicle I did not recognize, parked too close to the rosebush Daniel had planted under our front window. I sat in the car for a moment with my hands still on the steering wheel. I remember thinking there had been another emergency. Maybe something with Eli. Maybe someone had called my family because my phone had died during shift change. Then I saw a woman in a navy blazer step out onto my porch holding a clipboard. A realtor. That was the first moment something inside me went cold. Not angry. Cold. I got out of the car and walked toward the house Daniel had rebuilt with his own hands. The porch rail still had one uneven section, because he always said he liked leaving one honest flaw in every project. The brass numbers beside the door were slightly crooked, because Eli had helped him put them up. I opened the front door. The first thing I saw was my mother standing in the living room, holding a tape measure. Vivian Mercer never looked out of place, not at funerals, not in hospitals, not standing in someone else's grief with polished shoes and pearl earrings. She had one end of the tape measure pressed against the fireplace. Grant stood near the windows, speaking to the realtor in a low voice. Elise was in my kitchen, opening cabinets like she was already deciding what should be thrown away. And leaning against Daniel's fireplace, right beside the framed photo of him holding Eli on his shoulders, was a red and white sign. For sale. For a second, I could not speak. My eyes moved from the sign, to my mother, to Grant, then back to the sign. "What is that doing in my house?" I asked. My voice sounded strange to me. Flat, too quiet. Vivian turned around slowly, as if I had interrupted something reasonable. "Nora," she said, "you're home early." I asked what that sign is doing in my house. The realtor looked uncomfortable. Grant did not. He smiled the way he always smiled when he thought he was about to explain my life to me. "We're just looking at options," he said. "Options for what?" "For the property." Elise called from the kitchen. "This place has potential. Nora, it just needs to be emotionally cleared out." Emotionally cleared out. Daniel's boots were still by the back door. His jacket was still hanging over the chair in the corner. His coffee mug, the chipped gray one with a grease stain near the handle, was still beside the sink because I could not bring myself to wash it. And my sister-in-law was talking about clearing him out like he was old wallpaper. I looked at my mother. "Why is there a realtor in my husband's house?" Vivian folded the tape measure with careful fingers. "Because someone has to think clearly while you're grieving." That was my mother. She could make cruelty sound like responsibility. I stepped farther into the room. "Daniel has been dead for 3 weeks. Grant said, 22 days. I looked at him. He shrugged. "You said it yourself at the service." I stared at my brother. And for the first time since Daniel's funeral, I felt something sharper than sadness. You counted? Grant looked away first. Vivian sighed. Nora, this is exactly why we're concerned. You're exhausted. You're emotional. You're working too many hours. This house is too much for you. It is my house. That is complicated, she said. No, I said, it is not. The realtor shifted near the fireplace. I was told there was a family title issue, she said softly. I turned to her. Who told you that? Grant cleared his throat. There are old Mercer interests attached to the property. I almost laughed. Daniel had heard that phrase for 10 years. Mercer interests. My family used it whenever they wanted something to sound more important than theft. Before I could answer, I heard small footsteps at the top of the stairs. Eli stood there in his dinosaur pajamas, even though it was 4 in the afternoon. He had Daniel's eyes. That was still the hardest thing. Some mornings, I could look at him and feel comfort. Other mornings, it was like grief had learned to wear my child's face. He looked down at the sign by the fireplace. Mommy, I forced myself to breathe. Go back upstairs, baby. He did not move. Why does it say for sale? No one answered. Then Vivian did something I have never forgiven. She walked to the stairs, softened her face, and spoke to my son like she was doing him a kindness. Sweetheart, grown-ups are making decisions. This house is going to your Uncle Grant now, but you and Mommy will be taken care of. Eli's face crumpled. Daddy's house? Vivian touched his arm. Your daddy loved you very much. But houses are for people who can manage them. I crossed the room so fast the realtor stepped back. Do not say another word to him. Vivian straightened. Nora, don't make this ugly. You brought a realtor into my home before my husband's coffee cup was cold. Grant muttered, Here we go. I looked at him. What did you say? He lifted both hands. Nothing, I just think Mom is right. You're not in a position to handle assets. Assets, I repeated. That word told me everything. Not home, not Daniel's work, not Eli's memories. Assets. Vivian's face hardened. You need to stop acting like Daniel left you some great estate. He was a mechanic, Nora. A good man, perhaps, but not a man who built a legacy. Eli started crying quietly. And then my mother said the sentence that would split my life into before and after. Widows don't own legacies, Nora. They survive on what real families allow them to keep. Nobody gasped. That is the part that stayed with me. The realtor looked down. Elise went still. Grant pretended to study the window frame. But nobody said, Vivian, that is cruel. Nobody said, her husband just died. Nobody said, that child is listening. So I bent down. I took Eli's hand. And I said, Go upstairs, baby. Pack your backpack for Mrs. Alvarez's house. Vivian blinked. You're leaving? No, I said. You are. Grant laughed once. Nora, be reasonable. I turned to the realtor. Did anyone show you legal authority to enter this property? She swallowed. I was told Mr. Mercer had family authorization. He does not. The room changed slightly. Not enough. But slightly. The realtor gathered her papers. I think I should go. Vivian said, That is unnecessary. I said, It is very necessary. When the realtor left, she took the sign with her. I watched it leave my living room. Then I looked at my mother, my brother, and my sister-in-law. You have 5 minutes to get out of my house. Grant stepped toward me. You're making a mistake. I looked at him and said, Then let it be mine. They left angry. My mother left last. At the door, she turned back and said, You have always confused stubbornness with strength. I wanted to tell her she had always confused control with love. But I was too tired. So I shut the door. Then I sat on the floor under the staircase and held Eli while he cried into my shoulder. That night, after I got him to sleep, I stood in the living room and looked at the fireplace. Daniel had built the mantel himself. 3 winters earlier, the original had cracked, and he spent 2 weekends sanding a new one in the garage while Eli sat on a bucket and handed him tools. "Your mother hates this mantel," he had told me. I had laughed. "She hates everything that didn't come from a designer." Daniel smiled and ran his hand over the wood. "Good, then it'll last." I touched that same mantel now, and for the first time, I wondered why my mother had moved so quickly. Vivian Mercer did not rush unless there was money involved. To understand my mother, you need to understand the house I came from. The Mercers were not rich in the way people imagine from movies. We did not have gates or staff or oil portraits in hallways, but we had enough money for my mother to build an entire religion around appearances. My father died when I was 16. And after that, Vivian became obsessed with the idea that the family had to look untouched. Grant, my older brother by 3 years, became her proof that the Mercer name would continue properly. He wore nice suits, he shook hands well. He said things like portfolio, leverage, and long-term positioning. I became useful. I was the daughter who remembered appointments. The daughter who handled my mother's prescriptions after her surgery. The daughter who picked up Grant when his first business failed. The daughter who covered family emergencies and never asked who would cover me. When I became a nurse, Vivian said she was proud. Then she added, "It's a respectable profession. Not ambitious, exactly, but respectable." When I met Daniel Bennett, she treated it like a phase. Daniel owned a repair shop on the west side of town. Bennett Auto. 2 bays. 1 office with a cracked vinyl chair. A vending machine that stole quarters. The kind of place where men stopped by for oil changes and stayed to talk about their marriages, their bad knees, their sons who would not call. I met him because my car died after a double shift. It was raining. Of course it was raining. These stories always seem to know when to add weather. I was sitting in the hospital parking lot at 11:40 at night, crying from exhaustion more than anything else, when a tow truck pulled in. Daniel stepped out wearing an old canvas jacket and a baseball cap with grease on the brim. He looked at me through the rain and said, "You Nora Mercer?" I wiped my face fast. "Yes, I'm Daniel. Your charge nurse called my shop. Said you've been keeping people alive all day and your car decided not to return the favor." That was the first time he made me laugh. He fixed the car enough to get it running and refused to charge me the full emergency fee. I argued. He said, "Pay me when you've slept." I said, "That sounds like a terrible business model." He smiled. "It's not my worst one." I went back the next week to pay him properly. I stayed for coffee. 2 years later, I married him. My mother wore beige to my wedding. Not cream, not champagne. Beige. She said it was elegant. It was mourning with pearls. At the reception, she gave a toast I can still hear. "Some women marry up," she said, lifting her glass. Nora married honest. I suppose that is something. People laughed because people are cowards at weddings. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table. I felt him lean close. "Let them talk," he whispered. "We'll build louder than they laugh." And he did. He bought the old blue house on Marigold Lane before we got married. The roof leaked. The porch sagged. The kitchen had yellow tile from a decade no one wanted to remember. My mother called it a project. Grant called it a money pit. Daniel called it ours. He fixed it room by room. He kept receipts for everything. Lumber, nails, permits, paint, plumbing, electrical work, property taxes, survey fees. Every invoice went into labeled folders. I used to tease him. "Daniel, no one needs a receipt for a doorknob from 6 years ago." He would tap the folder and say, "Paper protects people when people don't." I thought that was just one of his sayings. Daniel had a lot of sayings. Measure twice, swear once. Never trust a man who borrows your ladder and returns it clean. Quiet work counts twice. But the paper one came up more often after Eli was born. Especially in the last year of Daniel's life. He got sick slowly. Then all at once. At first it was fatigue. Then pain in his side. Then tests, then more tests. Then a doctor with kind eyes and a voice that had delivered bad news too many times. I was a nurse. That made it worse. People think medical knowledge helps. It does not. It just gives terror better vocabulary. Daniel tried to stay normal for Eli. He still went to the shop when he could, still made pancakes on Saturdays, still let Eli sit beside him on a stool while he sorted bolts into coffee cans. He also started doing things I did not understand. He showed Eli small hiding places in the house. The loose floorboard in the hall closet, the panel behind the laundry room shelf, the hollow space behind the old workbench in the shop. I told him not to fill Eli's head with secret passages. Daniel smiled. Every kid should know where the quiet places are. One afternoon, I heard him say to Eli, "If the house ever gets too loud, remember the storm box." Eli asked, "Is it for tornadoes?" Daniel said, "For different kinds of storms." I was in the doorway with a basket of laundry. "What storms?" I asked. Daniel looked at me. "Family ones." I thought he was joking. I wish I had asked more questions. But when someone you love is dying, there are too many questions and not enough courage to ask the ones that might make them admit they are preparing to leave you. So I let him have his little secrets with Eli. 2 weeks before Daniel died, he told me he was going to the shop to check payroll. He came home tired and pale, but calm. I found a business card in his jacket pocket when I did laundry. Harlan and Price Legal Services. I asked him about it. He said, "Just paperwork." "What paperwork?" "The boring kind." "Daniel," he took my hand. "Nora, I need you to trust me on something." I hated that sentence. It always means someone has decided to carry pain without you. He said, "If anything ever feels wrong after I'm gone, don't argue first. Read first." I told him not to talk like that. He smiled sadly. "You're a nurse. You know exactly how I need to talk." I cried that night in the bathroom with the shower running so Eli would not hear. Daniel died 19 days later, and Vivian started moving 22 days after that. The first week after the realtor incident, I tried to convince myself my family was just awful in the ordinary way. Cruel, yes. Controlling, yes. But maybe not criminal. Grief makes you generous with people who do not deserve it. Vivian called every morning. I stopped answering. Then she texted, "Nora, this silence is unhealthy. Nora, Grant is only trying to help. Nora, Daniel would not want you drowning in maintenance." That one made me put the phone face down, because Daniel would have hated the word maintenance applied to our home. Grant showed up 2 days later with a folder. I opened the door but left the chain on. He looked offended. "Really? What do you want?" He lifted the folder. "Temporary authority forms. Just so I can help sort out property questions." There are no property questions. There are always property questions after a death. "You sound rehearsed." He smiled thinly. "You sound paranoid." I reached through the gap and took the folder. "I'll review it." His expression changed. "I was hoping you'd sign while I'm here." "I'm sure you were." I closed the door. At the kitchen table, after Eli went to bed, I read every page. On the surface, the forms looked harmless. Administrative authority, temporary family representation, estate coordination. But tucked into the third page was a clause giving Grant permission to negotiate sale, transfer, or development options related to the residence and associated parcels. Associated parcels. I read that phrase 3 times. The house sat on a normal lot. At least, I thought it did. The next morning, I went to the county website before work and searched Daniel's name. It took me 30 minutes and 2 cups of coffee. There it was. Daniel Bennett. Residential parcel, Marigold Lane. Commercial parcel, rear access lot, adjoining Bennett Auto. I stared at the screen. Rear access lot. Daniel had owned the land behind the shop. I knew there was a fenced area back there. gravel, weeds, an old storage shed, a line of maple trees. Daniel used it for overflow parking sometimes. I thought he leased it. He owned it. And the taxes were current. Paid every year. By Daniel. I printed the records at the hospital during my lunch break and hid them in my locker like they were contraband. That evening, Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door. She lived across the street and had known Daniel since before I did. She brought soup after the funeral and never once said everything happens for a reason, which made me love her. She stood on the porch holding an envelope. Daniel asked me to give you this if people started coming around, she said. My skin prickled. What people? She gave me a look. You know exactly what people. Inside the envelope was a single handwritten note. Nora, if Mrs. Alvarez gives you this, it means the house got loud. Ask Eli about the storm box. Do not sign anything from Grant. Call Harlan. I sat down on the porch step. Mrs. Alvarez lowered herself beside me slowly. He came over before the hospital, she said. Made me promise. Why didn't he tell me? Her face softened. Because you were trying to survive each day, child. He was trying to protect the ones after. That night, I asked Eli about the storm box. He was sitting on the living room rug, building a crooked tower out of blocks. Baby, I said carefully, do you remember Daddy talking about the storm box? His hands froze. For a moment, he looked older than 7. Is Grandma taking the house? I swallowed. No, but I need to know what Daddy showed you. He looked toward the hallway. Daddy said only if the house gets loud. It got loud, sweetheart. He nodded. Then he stood up and took my hand. He led me to the hall closet. It still smelled faintly like Daniel's work coats. Eli pushed aside the vacuum cleaner and knelt near the back wall. His little fingers found a loose strip of wood near the baseboard. He pulled it gently. A narrow compartment opened. Inside was a key wrapped in Daniel's red shop rag. And a note. When the house gets loud, show Mommy the quiet place. For a second, I could not breathe. I held that key in my palm. And I felt Daniel in the room so strongly it almost hurt to stay standing. Eli whispered, Did I do good? I pulled him into my arms. You did perfect. The key did not open anything in the house. I tried the desk, the filing cabinet, the storage chest in the bedroom. Nothing. Then Eli said, maybe the shop. The shop. Bennett Auto had been closed since Daniel's last hospital admission. Caleb, Daniel's longtime employee, had been keeping an eye on it. But I had not been able to go inside since the funeral. The next morning, I asked Mrs. Alvarez to watch Eli and drove there alone. The sign still hung over the front. Bennett Auto Repair. Daniel had painted it himself. Vivian said it looked cheap. Daniel said it looked paid for. Inside, the shop smelled like oil, dust, rubber, and him. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before I could move. Then I went to the office. The key did not open the desk. It did not open the supply closet. It opened a gray floor safe hidden behind an old stack of tire catalogs under the workbench. My hands shook so badly I dropped the key twice. Inside the safe were folders. Not 1, not 2. 7. Each labeled in Daniel's block handwriting. House, shop, rear lot, taxes, trust, Mercer, Nora. There was also a pen drive taped to the inside lid, and a sealed letter with my name on it. I did not open the letter first. That may sound cold. But I am a nurse. In crisis, you do not collapse first. You assess. So I spread the folders across Daniel's desk and began reading. The house deed was clean. Daniel Bennett, owner, then a later transfer into the Bennett Family Trust. The shop. Daniel Bennett, owner, then transferred into the same trust. The rear lot. Daniel Bennett, owner, also transferred into the trust. Trustee, Nora Bennett. Beneficiary, Eli Bennett. Successor trustee if I became unable, Caleb Monroe. Not Vivian, not Grant. Not anyone from the Mercer family. Caleb, I put my hand over my mouth and laughed once, almost silently. Daniel had known. He had known exactly who would come. The Mercer folder was thinner. It contained copies of emails. Printed messages. A letter of intent between Grant Mercer and a development company called Waverly Commercial Group. The date on the first email was 9 days before Daniel died. 9 days. Grant had been negotiating the future sale of land my husband still owned while my husband was dying. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the desk. There are moments when anger arrives so large it feels almost clean. Not messy. Not hot. Clean, like a blade. I opened the Nora folder last. Inside was the card for Harlan and Price. And a note. Read everything. Then call him. Don't go alone. I called Mr. Harlan from Daniel's office with the pen drive still untouched beside my hand. His secretary put me through immediately. That told me enough. Nora Bennett, I said. There was a pause. Then a man's voice, older and careful. Mrs. Bennett, I'm very sorry for your loss. You knew I might call. Yes, because my husband knew my family would try to take the house. Another pause. Yes, he said. He was afraid they would move quickly. I looked at the Mercer folder. They did. Mr. Harlan exhaled. Do not sign anything. Do not meet them alone. And please bring me what Daniel left you. What is on the pen drive? A silence. Daniel wanted you to choose when to watch it. I closed my eyes. Is it goodbye? Yes, he said. But not only that. I did not watch it that day. I put everything back in the safe, except copies of the key documents. Then I drove to the legal office and sat across from Mr. Harlan at a polished table under fluorescent lights that made my grief feel strangely official. He was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that did not soften the truth. Daniel had gone to him after discovering Grant's conversations with Waverly Commercial Group. How did Daniel find out? I asked. Your brother sent an email to the wrong Bennett auto address, Mr. Harlan said. Daniel had an old admin account still forwarding to his phone. Of course. Grant had always been careless when he thought someone was beneath him. Mr. Harlan explained it slowly. The rear lot behind Bennett Auto had become valuable because of a planned access road. Waverly wanted it for a commercial strip development. Grant had heard about it through someone at his golf club. But Grant had a problem. He did not own the land. So he began building a story. An old Mercer family deed, a claim that Vivian had once contributed money toward the house. Suggestions that Daniel's illness made future title transfer likely. Enough smoke to get a developer interested. Enough pressure, maybe, to make a grieving widow sign something before she read it. I sat very still. My mother knew? Mr. Harlan slid one printed email across the table. Vivian, Nora will fold if we frame it as Eli's future. She cannot manage grief and paperwork. Once she signs temporary authority, I can move the parcel option forward. Grant, below that, my mother had replied. Do it quickly. Sentiment makes poor women stubborn. I read that sentence until the letters blurred. Sentiment makes poor women stubborn. Not grieving women. Not daughters. Poor women. That was how she saw me without Daniel. Not widowed. Reduced, I folded the email and set it down. Mr. Harlan watched me carefully. Nora, we can handle this quietly. A formal letter may be enough. No, I said. He waited. I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. They brought a realtor into my living room. They told my son his father's house was going to his uncle. They made it public enough to wound us. They can learn the truth the same way. Mr. Harlan did not smile. But something in his face approved. Then we do it carefully, he said. Carefully became my new word. For the next 4 days I did not confront anyone. Vivian mistook my silence for weakness. She always had. She sent more messages. Nora, we should meet as a family. Nora, Grant says you refused to sign something routine. Nora, you are making this harder on Eli. Then finally, we will come Saturday at 4. This needs to be settled. I replied, fine, Saturday at 4. Then I called Mr. Harlan, I called Caleb, I called Mrs. Alvarez, and then, on Friday night, after Eli fell asleep, I sat in Daniel's office at the shop and watched the pen drive. For a long time, I just stared at it. It looked too small to hold the last piece of my husband. Finally, I plugged it into the old computer. The screen flickered. A video file appeared. For Nora if needed. I clicked. Daniel appeared on screen sitting in the shop office. He looked thinner than I wanted to remember. His skin had that gray undertone I had pretended not to see. But his eyes were clear. He looked directly into the camera. Hey, Nor. That was all it took. I broke. Not loudly, I did not wail. I covered my mouth and bent over the desk while the video kept playing. Daniel waited on the screen like he knew I would need a second. Then he said, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. I was hoping you'd never need it. I wiped my face with my sleeve. He continued, I need you to know first that I did not hide things because I didn't trust you. I hid them because you were carrying enough. You were trying to be my wife, Eli's mother, a nurse, and a woman watching the person she loves leave one day at a time. I could not add my fear of your family to that pile every night. He looked down for a moment. Then, back up. Grant tried to sell the rear lot. Your mother knows. Maybe she convinced herself it was for the family. Maybe that's what she calls it when she chooses him. I don't know. A weak smile crossed his face. I was never good at understanding rich people when they got hungry. I laughed through tears. Then his face became serious. Nora, this house is yours. The shop is protected. The lot is protected. Eli is protected. Harlan has everything. Caleb knows enough to help. Mrs. Alvarez has the first note. Because that woman remembers everything and scares me a little. I cried harder. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. If Vivian is in my house when this plays, then Vivian, I'll say this plainly. You mistook my silence for permission. I built that home for my wife and my son, not for your favorite child's debts. I froze. He had made part of the video for her. For them. Nora, he said, softer now, you do not need to beg for a place I already gave you. You do not need to prove you belonged there. You were the reason I built it. I pressed my hand to the screen. The rest was for me. For Eli. For the years Daniel would miss. He told Eli to be kind, but not easy to push. He told me to repaint the kitchen if I wanted, because he knew I hated the green more than I admitted. He told me where he had hidden the good socket wrench because Caleb always borrowed it, and at the end he said, you once asked why I kept every receipt. Paper protects people when people don't. But love does too, Nor. Real love pays attention ahead of time. The video ended. I sat in the dark office for a long time. Then I copied the file onto 2 drives, exactly the way Mr. Harlan told me. Saturday came bright and cold, too pretty for what was about to happen. I cleaned the house that morning, not because Vivian was coming, but because Daniel had always said a room should be ready when truth walks in. I made Eli pancakes. I took him to Mrs. Alvarez's at 3. He did not want to go. Are they going to be mean again? He asked. I knelt in front of him. Maybe. Can I stay with you? Not for this part. His eyes filled. Is Daddy's key enough? I kissed his forehead. Daddy's key opened the door. Now Mommy has to walk through it. At 4 o'clock exactly, Vivian arrived. Grant and Elise came with her. So did the realtor from before, looking like she wished she had chosen another career. And a man in a navy suit who introduced himself as a representative from Waverly Commercial Group. That part was useful. I had not invited him. Grant had. He wanted witnesses for his victory. Good, witnesses were exactly what I needed. Vivian entered without hugging me. She looked around the living room and frowned at the family photos still on the mantel. I see you haven't started packing. No, I said. I haven't. Grant set a folder on the coffee table. Let's make this efficient. Elise sat on the edge of the sofa, smoothing her skirt. We all want what's best for Eli. I looked at her. No, you don't. Her mouth opened. Vivian said, Nora, I held up one hand. I agreed to meet, not to perform. Grant's smile tightened. Fine, then let's talk facts. He opened his folder and pulled out papers. There are unresolved questions around the property, including historical Mercer contributions and associated land rights. Waverly is prepared to make a generous offer, but we need authority consolidated. Consolidated, I repeated. Grant nodded. The simplest path is temporary assignment to me as family representative. We sell the rear parcel, possibly the house depending on valuation, and set aside a portion for Eli. A portion. It's more than fair. Vivian leaned forward. Nora, this is the moment to be mature. I looked at the fireplace. I remembered the sign. I remembered Eli crying on the stairs. I remembered Daniel saying, read first. Then I said, before I sign anything, I invited someone. Grant's eyes narrowed. The doorbell rang. I opened it. Mr. Harlan stepped inside carrying a leather folder. Behind him came Caleb in his cleanest work shirt, nervous but steady. And Mrs. Alvarez, wearing a blue cardigan and the expression of a woman who had lived long enough to enjoy a well-timed ending. Vivian stood. What is this? Mr. Harlan looked at her. My name is Thomas Harlan. I was Daniel Bennett's attorney. Grant's face changed first. Not much, but enough. The Waverly representative sat up straighter. Mr. Harlan turned to him. I'm glad you're here. This will save us a phone call. Grant said, This is unnecessary. Mr. Harlan said, I disagree. He placed his folder on the coffee table. Vivian looked at me. Nora, what have you done? I thought of every time she had asked that question when I disappointed her. When I chose nursing. When I chose Daniel. When I chose a simple wedding. When I chose a house she did not approve of. This time, I answered. I read. Mr. Harlan opened the folder. He began with the house, the deed, the transfer, the trust. He passed copies around the room. Vivian did not take hers at first. Mrs. Alvarez said, You should read it, Vivian. My mother took the paper. Mr. Harlan continued. The residence at Marigold Lane was legally owned by Daniel Bennett and transferred into the Bennett Family Trust prior to his death. Nora Bennett is the acting trustee. Eli Bennett is the named beneficiary. Grant said, That doesn't address associated parcels. Mr. Harlan turned a page. It does. He produced the second deed. The rear access lot adjoining Bennett Auto was purchased by Daniel Bennett 7 years ago and transferred into the same trust. The Waverly man looked at Grant. You said there was a competing family claim. Grant adjusted his tie. There is historical context. Mr. Harlan slid over another page. There is an invalid deed from a separate Mercer property that has no legal bearing on the Bennett parcels. Vivian said, Daniel must have been confused. I looked at her. Do not. She ignored me. He was ill. He was on medication. He could barely, Mr. Harlan cut in, calm and firm. Mr. Bennett executed these documents while medically competent. Witnessed, notarized, reviewed, filed, there is no confusion. Grant's voice sharpened. This is a family matter. No, Mr. Harlan said. It became a legal matter when you attempted to negotiate sale terms for property you did not own. The room went very quiet. Elise looked at Grant. What does that mean? Mr. Harlan removed the printed emails. Grant's email. Vivian's reply. The letter of intent. The Waverly representative read them with increasing discomfort. Elise whispered, Grant? Grant said nothing. Vivian found her voice. You had no right to dig through private family communication. I laughed once. It surprised everyone, including me. You came into my house with a realtor. Vivian's face flushed. I was trying to protect this family. No, I said. You were trying to protect Grant from the consequences of being Grant. Grant snapped, careful. I turned to him. You negotiated with a developer while Daniel was dying. He stood. You don't understand business. I understand dates. I picked up the email. 9 days before my husband died, you wrote that I would fold if you framed it as Eli's future. Elise covered her mouth. The realtor looked horrified. The Waverly man closed his folder. Vivian said, People say things in stressful times. I looked at her. You replied, Do it quickly. Sentiment makes poor women stubborn. That landed. Even Grant looked away. Vivian's face hardened into something older than anger. You were always so dramatic. No, I said, I was always convenient. There's a difference. She stepped closer. You think a few papers make you strong? I felt Daniel's flash drive in my pocket. No, I said. They make me protected. Grant grabbed his folder. This meeting is over. Mr. Harlan said, Not quite. I walked to the television and plugged in the drive. Vivian stared at me. What is that? I did not answer. Daniel's face appeared on the screen. The whole room went still. There are many kinds of silence. This was the kind that makes guilty people afraid to breathe. Daniel looked out at us from the shop office, thin but clear-eyed. Hey, Nor, he said. My chest tightened. I kept my eyes on the screen because if I looked at anyone else, I might break in a way I did not want them to see. Daniel spoke gently at first. To me. Then to Eli. Then his expression changed. If Vivian is in my house when this plays, he said, then Vivian, I'll say this plainly. You mistook my silence for permission. I built that home for my wife and my son. Not for your favorite child's debts. Elise slowly turned toward Grant. Debts? Grant said, Elise. Daniel continued. Nora, you do not need to beg for a place I already gave you. You do not need to prove you belonged there. You were the reason I built it. My mother sat down. Not because she was moved. Because her knees finally understood what her pride had not. Daniel's voice filled the living room he had built. Paper protects people when people don't. But love does too. Real love pays attention ahead of time. The video ended. Nobody moved. I turned off the television. For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator and Mrs. Alvarez quietly crying behind me. Then Grant exploded. This is manipulative, he said. A dead man making accusations when he can't be questioned. Caleb spoke for the first time. He had you on paper, Grant. Grant turned on him. You stay out of this. Caleb took one step forward. I worked for Daniel for 11 years. I watched him pay every tax bill. I watched him turn down offers on that lot. I watched him build that house after closing time with hands so cracked he could barely hold a fork. You don't get to walk in with a folder and call that yours. Grant's mouth opened. But nothing useful came out. The Waverly representative stood. Mr. Mercer, based on what I've seen, our company is withdrawing all interest pending legal review. Grant's face went pale. Wait. The man did not. He left. The realtor followed, apologizing to me twice on the way out. Then it was just family, or what was left of it. Vivian looked at me with an expression I had wanted my whole life. But not like this. She finally saw me. Not as her disappointing daughter, not as Daniel's widow, not as Grant's obstacle. As someone she had underestimated badly. Nora, she said, quieter now. You don't want to do this. What am I doing? Destroying your brother? I looked at Grant. He was sweating at the collar. No, I said. I'm letting him meet himself. Vivian's eyes flashed. He is your family, so was I. She flinched. Good, not enough, but good. I picked up the copy of her email and held it out. You called me poor. You called my grief sentiment. You told Grant to move quickly before I woke up. I was angry. You were honest. For the first time, she had no answer. Grant tried a different voice then. Softer, almost pleading. Nora, look, I made mistakes. But Waverly was going to pay well. You could still benefit. There is no deal. There could be. You don't know what that land is worth. I know exactly what it's worth. He looked hopeful. I said, it is worth more than your debt. Elise stood up. What debt? Grant closed his eyes. That was its own confession. Vivian said, this is between Grant and Nora. Elise turned on her. No, apparently it's between Grant, Nora, Daniel, a developer, a trust, and whatever debt my husband forgot to mention. Mrs. Alvarez murmured, finally someone's reading the room. I almost smiled. Almost, Mr. Harlan gathered the documents. Mrs. Bennett has instructed me to send formal notice. No member of the Mercer family is authorized to enter, negotiate, represent, list, transfer, or otherwise interfere with any Bennett Trust property. Any further attempt will be handled legally. Vivian looked at me. You would take your own mother to court? I remembered Daniel's boots by the door. I remembered Eli asking if heaven had garages. I remembered my mother telling my son his father's house was going to Grant. Yes, I said, if she tries to steal from my child. The word steal hit harder than any legal phrase. Vivian recoiled. I never stole anything. You tried to take a house while the widow was working and the child was upstairs. Her face twisted. You always make yourself the victim. I stepped closer. No, Mother, you made me the witness. Grant grabbed his coat. This is insane. He walked toward the door. Before he left, he turned back and looked at the living room. The mantel. The walls Daniel had painted. The floor Daniel had refinished. The place he had tried to convert into cash. Then he looked at me. You think you won? I shook my head. No, Daniel planned. I listened. That's not the same thing. He left. Elise followed him, but not closely. Vivian remained near the fireplace. For one strange second, she looked old. Not elegant. Not powerful. Old, she touched the mantel with 2 fingers. He was never right for you, she said. I felt tired all the way through my bones. You're standing in the home he built to protect me after death, and you still think that. She looked at me. You could have had an easier life. I know, that confused her. So I finished. I chose a better one. Vivian left without saying goodbye. After the door closed, I stood very still. Then Mrs. Alvarez came over and wrapped her arms around me. That was when I finally cried. Not because they had lost. Because Daniel had loved me so carefully that he had reached through death and held the door shut against people who thought grief made me weak. The weeks after were not easy. People love the moment of exposure. They imagine everything becomes clean after truth enters the room. It does not. Truth is not a broom. It is a light. And once it is on, you still have to clean what you can finally see. Mr. Harlan sent the notices. Grant's agreement with Waverly collapsed. The company denied any further involvement and turned over communications to protect itself. Grant tried to blame misunderstandings, but paper is not sentimental. Paper remembers tone, dates, and signatures. Elise moved out 3 weeks later. I heard that from an aunt who called pretending to check on me. Vivian did not call. For once, silence from my mother felt like mercy. The first Friday after everything, I reopened Bennett Auto. Not fully, just enough. Caleb came in early. So did 2 other mechanics Daniel had trusted over the years. They brought coffee, donuts, and the awkward tenderness of men who wanted to help but did not want to say feelings out loud. Caleb handed me the shop keys. Daniel wanted you to have these. I looked at them. I don't know how to run a garage. He smiled. You know how to read a file. That puts you ahead of most people who think they can. So I learned. I learned payroll, vendor accounts, insurance, parts ordering. I kept nursing 3 days a week and spent the other days at the shop until my body remembered exhaustion as an old language. At first, I thought I was preserving Daniel's memory. Then slowly, something changed. The shop became not just what Daniel left. It became what Eli and I kept. The rear lot stayed fenced for a while. I had offers. Good ones. I said no to all of them. Then, one afternoon, Caleb mentioned that Daniel had once talked about using part of it for a training bay. Kids who don't want college, he said. Kids who need someone to show them a trade. That sounded like Daniel. So we started small. 1 scholarship in his name. Then, 2. The Daniel Bennett Working Hands Fund. Vivian would have hated the name. That made me like it more. 6 months after the day my mother brought the realtor, Eli and I stood inside the shop near the old office wall. He was holding a pencil. Daniel had marked Eli's height there every birthday since he could stand. I had avoided looking at those marks for months. Eli pressed his back against the wall. Am I taller? I swallowed. A little. I marked the wall. Eli turned around and looked at the new line. Then he asked, do we get to stay? The question broke something in me all over again. Not because I did not know the answer. Because my son had lived with that question in his little body for half a year. I knelt in front of him. Yes, baby, we get to stay. In Daddy's house? In our house. He nodded seriously. Then he looked around the shop. Did Daddy win? I thought about that. Winning sounded too small for what Daniel had done. He had not beaten them. He had known them. He had prepared. He had loved with paperwork and wood glue and hidden keys and legal signatures and one final video recorded when breathing must have already hurt. So I said, no. Daddy loved us carefully. That's better. Eli accepted that because children understand truth faster than adults do. That evening, we went home. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. I stood in the living room and looked at the fireplace. The mantel Daniel built was still there. The roses outside the window had started blooming again. His gray mug was still on the kitchen shelf, washed now but not put away. I ran my hand along the wood and thought of my mother's sentence. Widows don't own legacies. She was wrong. Widows own memories. Widows own signatures. Widows own the right to read before they sign. Widows own the strength people mistake for silence. And sometimes, if they were loved by a man who paid attention, widows own the house too. My mother thought widowhood made me temporary. My brother thought grief made me weak. But Daniel knew the truth. He knew I would not scream first. I would read. I would organize. I would remember. And when they came for the house he built with tired hands and honest work, they learned that love can leave receipts too.